Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Want to welcome you to the last of a five-part series. That five-part series is entitled Challenges for Muslim Leaders in the 15th and 21st Century. Before we launch into our last session, I'd like to review what we've done thus far. We've had 4 prior sessions, all focused around the issue of challenges facing Muslim leaders in the 15th and the 21st century. The 15th century, of course, is the 15th century after the migration of Prophet Muhammad from Mecca to Medina. This is the way the Muslims mark their calendar. And the 21st century, of course, is the one that we use for commerce. It's called the Common Era, which is actually based on the Gregorian calendar, which is now in the 21st century. So we're looking at challenges, and we've looked at in the past 4 sessions at challenges facing Muslims in the 15th and the 21st century. We began by looking at what are our challenges in the 15th and 21st century, and we looked at what I call the 3 Ds that are our challenges, the challenging Ds, if you were, the D of despair, right? That we feel like somehow we don't feel that we're up to dealing with the situations that we have, and a lack of what Muslims call tawakkul, dependence on Allah, because we feel that some people have more than we do, and somehow we don't have the inner strength, either individually or collectively, to do the things that we need to do. And it's a very, very powerful psychological situation. If you really want to beat somebody, you make him or her think that they cannot do something. Even if they're physically and mentally able to do it, you've won the battle. Because even if they're physically and mentally able to do it, and you leave them in a place of despair, then they won't do it. And that's why many of the battles that have been won, famous battles over history, have been won based on psychology. Not on the might of one side or another, but this whole attitude. So first is despair. The second is disorganization. And something we've alluded to in Muslim masajid, Muslim organizations, because when we look around the world, there's absolutely no reason why Muslims shouldn't be better focused, more literate, better economic situation than we are. Because if we look at the oil reserves, the majority of that are with the Muslims, if we look at the land mass that the Muslims control, if we look at the educational attainment of Muslims in places like the United States or in India, for instance, then one would wonder why the Muslims are in the kind of situation that we're in. And I would argue that the reason that we're in that situation is not because we don't have the money, it's not because we don't have the education, it's not because we don't have the material, it's not because we don't have the land, it's because we're disorganized. We don't know what our primary task is. And the third D, we're disconnected. In other words, we're no longer connected to our viable roots as Muslims, that we're disconnected to our, we often, rather than having deep roots in the Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, we read the Quran by rote. We make our prayers by rote. We fast in Ramadan by rote. We give the zakat by rote. We may make Hajj by rote, without it infusing our personality, without it infusing our hearts, without it being an important part of our very, very being. So this, in my view, this is the challenge, and this is what we talked about in the first program. This is the primary challenges that are facing the Muslim community, has to do with our sense of despair. It has to do with our lack of organization. And it has to do with our disconnectedness or our lack of connection to our primary roots, the Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. So we went from there to looking at what are our obligations to our neighbors. Because we take up this topic in the context of leadership simply because as I travel around the world and travel around the United States, I don't hear many Muslim leaders talking about our obligation to our neighbors. I hear many of us talking about how badly our neighbors are treating us, but the reality is that if you study the seerah or the biography of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, you will find that this was a very much an important part of his understanding of what his obligation and responsibility was. And so therefore, if we really, really follow the Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, we will make sure that we give our neighbors their right. How do we do this? By being responsible for being a good role model. How do we do this? By adding real value to the places that we live. In other words, if a Muslim is in a locality, that locality should be better off because the Muslims are there, because the Muslims help keep it clean, because the Muslims help support civic enterprises, because the Muslims don't gossip about their neighbors, because the Muslims don't do things that are negative, have a negative impact on the common good. The fact of the matter is that many of us have lost this idea of real value. We only want to do some things for the Muslims. We only want to do things for our family. We only want to do things for our ethnic group that happen to be Muslims. And so we have real value from the Muslims. No matter where we are, we should be contributing to the common good. This is how we implement the kind of leadership that's based on the Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So we have a responsibility to our neighbors to, first of all, and we're recounting this because we're wrapping up here. We're going to get to our topic for today. We have a responsibility to our neighbors to provide a role model, right? Okay? We have a responsibility to our neighbors to add real value to wherever we are, that civic responsibility. And we have a responsibility to our neighbors to be responsive to their needs as best we can. I mean, we can't be responsive to all their needs. Some of them think they need alcohol or khamr. We can't be responsible for their needs. Or if we don't have anything to eat and they can't eat, we can't be responsive to their needs. But in the way that we can, and where I live in New Haven, Connecticut, in the United States of America, and one of the ways we're responsive to the needs of people around us is that we sit on the neighborhood watch, and we help organize the neighborhood for neighborhood cleanup, and we help organize the neighborhood to distribute food in the neighborhood to Muslims and non-Muslims alike in that neighborhood. And so this is what I mean about being responsive to the needs of the people at that particular time. And so we have this obligation to neighbors, and as we said before, Muslims don't talk about it enough, and certainly our neighbors don't know about it. All you have to do is go to places and ask, well, you have a Muslim neighbor, do you know anything about him or her? And oftentimes they don't know anything about us because we build high walls, we may not speak to them, and we don't have any kind of interaction with them. And all the while, if you look into the Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, you'll find that this is one of the core values of the initial Muslim Ummah. One of the core values of the Ummah was obligation that we have to the neighbor, and we quoted the sound hadith to this effect that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that the angel Jibril admonished him to be good to his neighbor so much that he thought that he was going to have to write him into his will. So that was the second program. The first program was what are the challenges that we're facing. The second program was to resurrect the idea, because I think that we've lost it over time in the Muslim Ummah, to resurrect the idea that part of our leadership responsibility as Muslims, part of that responsibility is to be good to our neighbors. They have obligations, not good because we want to do it not necessarily, but good because we love to follow the Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. So we moved to the third program, and in that third program we looked at what is Muslim leadership. You know, we can't assume that everybody knows what it is. We made some general comments about the difference between power, authority, and leadership, and then we launched into a discussion of the fundamental components of what we believe that Muslim leadership is about. Fundamentally, if somebody's going to lead your masjid, if somebody's going to lead your Muslim organization, whether it's a male or female Muslim organization, I would argue that you would look for these three basic characteristics in that person. Number one, devotion to Allah and His Messenger. Number two, discipline, that self-discipline, the person that you don't have to worry about guarding his or her tongue, or guarding their hands, or guarding where they go. That person has this inner discipline, this motivation to follow the Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him. And number three, it should be somebody who values development, and by development in this sense, values education, and not just education so I can sit here and say I'm smarter than you and I can roll off certain things that I've learned either in the Islamic sciences or in the so-called secular world. But the education that you can apply for the good of yourself, for this life and the hereafter, the good of the Muslim Ummah, and for the good of all humanity. Because as we said in the earlier program when we talked about responsibility to neighbors, one of the reasons that we have this responsibility is that the Quran makes it clear that Prophet Muhammad is a witness for the Muslims, and the Muslims are witnesses to all humanity. And this is a very, very heavy responsibility, my dear brothers and sisters, and indeed a very, very heavy responsibility. So what we're looking at, and what we looked at in the third show, was the whole notion of what it means to be a Muslim leader. Then we moved to the fourth show, and there was something called the PV syndrome. The PV syndrome, the post-victimization ethical exemption syndrome. The post-victimization ethical exemption syndrome. This concept is so absolutely clear in Islam that you don't have to be an alim to understand that justice is one of the primary core values of Islam. And so we started our discussion of the PV syndrome when talking about justice. We'll pick up right after the break and continue our review and get into our last topic for this 5-part series. We'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Jimmy Jones wishing you and your families a blessed month of Ramadan. May Allah accept it from you and from us and me.
Where truth is hidden, misleading quotations create confusion. Where truth is hidden, lack of knowledge and wisdom cause upheaval and commotion. Where truth is hidden, manipulated scriptures and twisted facts emerge. This very hidden truth creates false propaganda, mayhem, chaos, disorder, and turmoil in our lives and the world order. But is there anyone with courage and wisdom? What is the truth, and who has the courage to expose it? Because it's your right to know the truth.
Watch truth prevail and lies perish in Truth Exposed by Dr. Zakir Naik. Every Sunday to Friday at 10:30 p.m. and repeat telecast at 7:30 a.m. India on Peace TV.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And we'll try to wrap it up quickly because we want to talk a little bit about our last topic, that is building Islamic infrastructure wherever you are. So when we went into the break, we were talking about the fact that justice is a core value in Islam, and the way we opened the last program was talking about justice and talking about that justice being an absolute value, and that you can't change that value simply because you want to help yourself or help your parent or help your kin or help rich or help poor. And so this is a very, very important point in terms of understanding the post-victimization ethical exemption syndrome. Because what we find with this syndrome, as we explained it in the last show, it's the idea, it's a malady, it's a psychological worldview that people have. It's an idea that because my people either are or have been oppressed, it's okay for me to abandon or leave aside the ethical principles that I profess to follow. This is the belief that because my people either have been or are currently being oppressed, that it's okay for me to put aside, to not pay any attention to the ethical principles that I profess to follow. And since we're talking about Muslim leadership here, We're talking about the challenges facing Muslim leaders in the 15th and 21st century. It's important that we understand that this kind of thinking is not going to lead us forward. And we connected to this kind of thinking the conspiracy theories that many Muslims in leadership positions and average Muslims have about the United States, about other governments, that get in the way of us exercising that role model that we talked about before, standing out for justice even if it's against ourselves, being the role model for all the world. Because my point about these conspiracy theories, if they're true, inshallah, they'll come out to light. Allah Ta'ala brings them out to light. God willing, they'll come to light. If they're not true, you're seen as an apologist for terror. That's what you're seen as, apologist for terror, instead of being the moral and educational leader of the world, as our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was, as we were in Al-Andalus, as we were in Baghdad, as we were in India, at different times over the course of history. And so we have to let go of this syndrome. We have to let go of the conspiracy theories, and we have to abide by the Quran and the Sunnah and follow the model of Prophet Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon him. I think what we face in this last session, what we ought to look at in this last session, is how do you build Muslim infrastructure wherever and whoever you are? Because these are, these principles, standing out for justice, these are high-sounding principles, but it's no good, as we said in one of our programs, as we said in the program about leadership development, it's no good unless you can apply it. So let me give you some ways of thinking about applying these principles. All right, there are three places that you can look for to build Islamic infrastructure, in my view, right away. As you look around the world, given your particular responsibilities and given where you are. First of all, home. Second of all, in school or in educational facilities. Third is in what I call the public square. The first one is home. The second one is school. The third is what I call public square. Now, I just want to apologize for you because much of what I'm going to say, you probably have already heard in one form or fashion if you're Muslim, if you've been in any kind of Muslim educational program, and people who are better speakers than I am, who have deeper knowledge than I have probably said this. Okay, so what we're looking at is a situation where we should build our Islamic infrastructure in our homes, in our schools, and in what we call public space. I'd like to apologize to those of you who've heard many of these things I'm about to say before, simply because there are many people, many people in our community who are more articulate than I am, who've said these things. But I think it's incumbent upon me, rather than just give you theory about the challenges that are faced by Muslims in the 15th and the 21st century, to talk about some practical steps how to get there. And so, as I said, we'll look at it in terms of the home, in terms of the school, and in terms of what I call the public square, and talk about some things that we can do practically, male or female, in terms of facing the challenges that Muslim leaders have in the 15th and the 21st century. First of all, please forgive me, it sounds so obvious, in our homes, establish the salah. Establish the prayer in our homes. Pray together in our homes. Don't let it be a graveyard. Secondly, read the Quran, right? Make the Quran a friend of the family. Instead of the television being the friend of the family, make the Quran the friend of the family. These are some fundamental, basic things that if you're already doing them, alhamdulillah, all praises due to Allah. If you're not doing them, start doing them, because they're fundamental to the kind of leadership that we need to exercise now, and they're fundamental to the kind of leadership that we need to develop. So establish the salah, establish reading of the Quran. And again, these are very basic things. If you're already doing it, alhamdulillah, all praises due to Allah. If you're not doing, start doing it. It's a fundamental thing that we need to do in order to not only develop leadership, but exercise the leadership that we need right now to face the challenges in the 15th and the 21st century. The third thing that we need to do in our homes is make time for family. In many of our countries, in the United States, sometimes in the urban areas in places like India and Australia and other places in UK, we just simply don't have time for family. And that the reality is that if we look back on the Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he was an extremely, extremely busy man. Extremely, extremely busy man. Why? Because he was a spiritual leader. Why? Because he was an educational leader. Why? Because he was a political leader. Why? Because he was a military leader. But in spite of having to do all of these things, he always found time to be with his family. He had found time to be with his wives. He found time to be with his children. And when he had grandchildren, he found time to be with them as well. Now, if you are busier than Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, you need to check yourself out, because Prophet Muhammad had a major responsibility that none of us have. And so we should find time, male and female, to be with our family, to relax with them, to talk with them, to have fun with them. Again, read the seerah, read the biography of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and you see what I'm talking about. Let's look at our schools, because this is another place where we can face the challenges that we need to face in terms of dealing with the issues that Muslims have in the 15th and the 21st century. We should run our schools, those Muslim schools we have, with rahmah, with mercy. First of all, there are people who believe that we shouldn't have Muslim schools in the first place. And I say, how else are we going to maintain who we are, transmit who we are, and transform who we are for the common situation unless we have our own schools? This doesn't mean that every Muslim child has to go to a Muslim school, but we should have these bases of operation that are about knowledge production, knowledge maintenance, and knowledge transformation for our own good. Okay, so we should run these schools with mercy. We should make sure these schools are top-notch schools, right, educationally, and we should make sure that our children come out knowing the basic, the devotion to Allah and His Messenger, knowing the basics, being well disciplined, knowing how to acquire knowledge and knowing how to apply knowledge. Let's look at it in the public sphere. If we look at the history of Islam, we find that Islam in 3 areas has been excellent in the public sphere. One is in the medical sciences. In the United States of America, we have something called the Ummah Clinic in Los Angeles, where Muslims open up a clinic, a free clinic for people both Muslim and non-Muslim, and I believe mostly non-Muslims go there as an indication of our responsibility, our civic duty, our civic engagement. Where are our other hospitals in the United States of America that are run by Muslims and developed by Muslims? Where are other hospitals in other countries that are developed for the good of the common good, not only of Muslims, for other people? The other place is libraries. We have always been about knowledge production. Look at Cordoba, look at Spain, look at Andalus, and we understand that. Look at Baghdad, the largest libraries in the world, for a time when Europe had no libraries or had very small libraries, were amongst the Muslims. We need to revive this idea. And so we should be active in trying to do this. And so there are opportunities in the public sphere, there are opportunities in education, there are opportunities in our home life to face and deal with the challenges facing Muslims in the 15th and the 21st century. It's just that we need to step up. We need to make sure that we face those opportunities. The final place that I would suggest that we put our efforts and energies, particularly in the West and the United States where I am, is developing institutions of higher education. Again, historically speaking, we've been in the forefront of this. One of the oldest educational institutions in the world today is Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar, over 1,000 years old, one of the largest educational institutions. So we need to revive our love and thirst for higher education, and we need to establish institutions of higher education that our young people can go to in order to learn what they need to learn in order to face the challenges of the 15th and the 21st century. We hope that this has been intellectually stimulating for you. We hope that this series, this 5-part series, has urged you to go out and think about and talk about this more and put us into action so we can face the challenges that Muslims face in the 15th and 21st century. And for our non-Muslim friends, we hope that you've learned something of benefit to you as well. Thank you very much for watching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.